Welcome to the One Inside, an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. On today's episode, I chat with Dorothea Hrossowyc and Ingrid Helander about the power of healing our own racism. Hey everyone, I'm going to try to keep this super short because this is a little bit of a long episode and I want you to listen to the whole thing. My favorite parts are probably the last 20 minutes. So I want you to listen to the whole thing. Ingrid and Dorothea were two of a team of four who spoke at the 2018 Annual Conference. And this episode is about that, about their experiences working with their own racist parts. I think this episode is part storytelling, part history, part science. It also really invites you to observe your own reactions to what is said in this episode. I think that you're probably going to notice parts of you that really resonate with what's said, and then you're going to have parts of you that might disagree. I think you're also going to think about your own story, about how the messages you were taught, how racism has shown up for you. And so I just want you just to pay attention to that. Pay attention to all your parts' reaction and use those as trailheads to do your own work. I also want you to know that I put a ton of resources in the show notes. So Dorothea and Ingrid have a lot of offerings for you. And so they are all in the show notes. Plus there's other resources from some of the things that we talk about because we talk about a lot of stuff. IFS is powerful, and that's what's said over and over and over again is we have this amazing, beautiful model, and it can help with every part of us. All parts are welcome, even our racist parts. Enjoy. So say who you are and then say where you are right now, and if you look out your nearest window, what would you see?
Okay, hi, I'm Dorothea Hrossowyc, and I have a Ukrainian, poorly anglicized Ukrainian last name, so it's hard to pronounce, but you don't pronounce the H or the C, so it's Hrossowyc. And I live in Northfield, Minnesota, and I live just about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile from a two-college town, a little town with two colleges, and on a farm. And the motto of the town is cows, colleges, and contentment. And we don't have any cows here on the farm. We raise turkeys. My husband raises turkeys and he has an organic fertilizer business. But here on the farm, it's a prairie. You know, it's not totally flat, but it's beautiful to look out. When I look out, I see grass and trees. And no matter what window you look out, you can see far. So it's really nice. I love it. And I see swings where my grandchildren love to play.
Well, that sounds amazing. Does your husband sell turkeys at this time of year?
All year round.
All year round. Okay.
These days, if you want to be a farmer with turkeys, you have to agree to raise the same amount year round.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Or they won't buy from you.
Oh.
Wow.
It's to keep their businesses, their processing businesses going.
That's so interesting. And then what about you, Ingrid? What do you see if you look out a nearest window?
Well, I have a triple window in front of me and I'm on the second floor of my house. So I look straight out into the woods, really. And it's been really fun this fall because it's gone from being very, very green all around me and kind of closed into bright oranges and yellows and vibrant colors. And now, kind of really beautiful sticks with some green white pines here and there. And these fat, fluffy gray and black squirrels that wander about all the time and make me jump because I think, what's that? And I look, oh yeah, I should know who that is. That's a squirrel again. And they've made me it's been really fun, actually. I just moved my office here, so this has been really nice. And I'm in northern Connecticut, central Connecticut, Granby, which is literally a stone's throw from Massachusetts, and like living here a lot. And I forgot what the rest of the question was.
That was
there more?
perfect. Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah. And I love you're describing the trees because sometimes I feel like when the leaves fall off the trees, I'm like, it's dead and everything's dead. But like, no,
Yes.
actually, you look at the branches and the sticks, and
You can
I
see
love
so much
that.
now. And I can
Yeah.
see into the woods, which before it was more like a wall and I couldn't see anything.
Oh,
And
yeah.
now I get this depth of, you can really see what's on the ground in there, and that maybe you could actually walk in there if the poison ivy is backed off a little bit. And,
I love
but
that.
yeah, it's fun. So.
I love it.
I'm a somatic therapist, and I was originally trained in emotional healing work through reevaluation counseling. And then I knew the body was really important, so I studied Rosen method body work, which is mind, body, spirit, emotional work. And then after that, since that's so non-theoretical, I studied somatic experiencing, and then Hakomi, experiential psychotherapy, and then sensory motor psychotherapy for trauma. And then I found IFS around 2009 or so. And I think it's really powerful. And I love that it is so body oriented. So I can really bring the body in to my IFS session. So I do that a lot. And my clients love that. They love what I teach them about how the body works in emotions.
Mm.
So I do a
Yeah,
lot of that.
that's
How about
great.
Ingrid?
Well, I went to school to become a therapist after my kids all were in school. I think we all started, I think my son started kindergarten and we started like sixth grade and something, and I started grad school at the same time. And decided to go into family therapy. I had always wanted to work with families. I was thinking originally of being a nutritional counselor way back when, and ended up with a degree in food science instead because I didn't want to stay in school. I wanted to have a family. So after I did that, I started looking back into the nutrition field and thought, I really love counseling. I really want to help people live fuller, better lives. And so I ended up with family therapy. And I was lucky enough to be at Central Connecticut, where Ralph Cohen is. And so learning IFS was like learning Bowen or, Mnuchin or, Satir or anyone. And so that just seemed normal and natural to me. So that was around 2000 that I was learning about IFS. And then I did what I called IFS Light in my family work in different iterations for about 10 years after graduation. And I would use it as I was helping my supervisees and my interns and my clients, and it always informed my thinking. And then I thought, wait, I can do this. I want more of this. And I also want this community. I really, I always had gone to the conferences and felt like, a little outside. And for some reason, I think it was just a longing, like I want more of this, So I went on to do level 1, level 2 with Tony, which was a 2-week, Tony Herbine Blank, which was 2 weeks at that time. And then level 3, and then I did advanced intimacy from the inside out with Tony and post-advanced. And then I went on to study polyvagel work with Deb Dana because that was sort of the special sauce for me. I would do parts work and parts work, but my specialty is really with worry and anxiety. And when I learned, the neurosystem is blameless and doing the most wonderful things for you, and if you can just tap into it, you have a whole other resource, that just clicked. So now I do most of my work with people who are suffering from chronic worry and help them to become more self-confident and really live with ease. So, yeah.
Cool. So Ingrid reminds me, I didn't say what I've studied in IFS. So I have level 1, I have 2 or 3 level 2s, I have or 4 level 2s, I have 2 level 3s, and then lots of the other, weekends on this or weekends on that. I have really liked it. And I think another important thing to know about me is that I've had activist parts my whole life. And you asked about how did we all get into this, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But even as a child, and I still do, and I've been leading anti-racism work for about 30 years in different modalities. And when I first moved to Minnesota, I had to find out what happened here. I could just sense, my parts could sense that something had happened on the land here. And so I read everything I could find about indigenous history here. And we had ethnic cleansing, forced removal, extermination, and genocide in recent history here. We've had it all over this country, but we've had it here in the last 150 years. And so that's been important to me. And I've done a lot of work with indigenous people here in Minnesota and South Dakota, North Dakota. And if you've read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, I've read that recently. It's a very powerful book. And we've known for a long time here, we've thought this, but she has proved it in research that Hitler based a lot of his policies toward the Jews on Native American and US policies toward Native American people here in the US. And, that's not a history that we learn in history books. Mostly indigenous people and the suffering they've had has been invisible, and that was intentional. So we wanted them to disappear. And so we haven't known this history. And the interesting thing to me is that Hitler's policies toward the Jews were actually milder. He went for milder policies than the US policies in the US, the policies we had in the US toward indigenous people. So
Wow.
that's important for us to know. And here in Minnesota, we had what was actually named a concentration camp. It was a fort that was originally supposed to keep the settlers out of Minnesota when we had treaties with the Native people for fur trading, and the US government liked that. But as the settlers started coming in and the army generals who were supposed to keep the treaties realized they could make a lot of money if they sold the land to settlers, they broke the treaties, and there was a war, eventually a war in Minnesota over whether they had to be forcibly removed or not, and they were put in what was called a concentration camp. So
Wow.
that's Isabel has researched that and found that Germany's policies were based on policies here. So I think that's important. And the other thing that I really like is that my city just passed a land acknowledgement, and that land acknowledgement idea, which is all over the place now, originally came from Minnesota. There was a young Anishinaabe older teenager, who was in the reevaluation counseling communities. And she asked those communities that every time anybody got together in a group, that they would acknowledge whose land we're on. And so she started that movement in 20 years ago in reevaluation counseling. Reevaluation counseling has been doing that all over the world for 20 years. And now it's spread everywhere. It's in New York City, and the colleges are doing it all over the place. And Carleton College and St. Olaf College here have just passed one, in my city just passed it after a long discussion 2 nights ago. So that was really cool. But I would like to share about how we came about to do all this work together, Ingrid and I, and a few other people. And I kind of accidentally discovered that IFS is really powerful in anti-racism work. And I was just having a session with my regular IFS counselor, and I had a young exile who was completely aware of classism. And her immigrant family, Ukrainian, Eastern European immigrants, were at the bottom of the class structure in Massachusetts, where I lived then, and where I grew up, until the French Canadians came in and the African Americans came in. Then we became white. But before that, we were at the bottom of this class structure. And that young girl measured herself against the indigenous Iroquois family down the street that they were friends with, and against the one African American family that lived in our little town. And she found herself not measuring up. And somehow, and that was really painful internalization, that she wasn't good enough. and she didn't understand the racism part really, but she understood the classism part, and I understood the connection with the racism as I was working with her, and I was amazed at that, and so I worked with that for a while, and then one year, I think it was a level two. I'm not sure. It was in Boston though. We were. It was about neuroscience and IFS, and a group of us were having lunch together nearby. Joya Lonsdale was there, and Tyler Haaren was there at lunch. And if you know them, then you know that they work a lot with Latinx families. And there were other people there too who also had experience in anti-racism work, and we were talking about it together and sharing about it and about our activism. And so I shared what I had learned, and I proposed. I had thought about this, that IFS was a really powerful tool, and that would others be willing to try an experiment that we could do for a while, where we would get together on the phone and share, trade sessions and work on our own racism, and then talk about it together, and then perhaps present what we find. And so a group of us agreed to get together, and I met Ingrid later that same weekend in an anti-racism. I think it might have been the first time Black Therapists Rock were there or had a thing, and you and I were paired up, and so that's how we met. We traded a session on racism, and so I brought Ingrid in and said, you want to be in this too, and she jumped at it, and that's how it started. And then we got together every month, once a month, and talked about what we were learning, and then we put together a proposal for the conference. And at the conference, lots of people were interested because at that time there wasn't much diversity in IFS, and people wanted it, but there was hardly any, and there was so little then. And Dick was really interested in it too, and he came to our workshop. And after the workshop, I checked in with him, and he liked it a lot. And I said, "Okay, good. Then we'll do a full day workshop next year." And then in the summer, I got a call, and he said, "Instead of a full day, we'd like you to be part of the plenary." So I took that back to the group, and we all kind of said, "We'll just do our regular full day workshop." and he said, "No, I really want the whole conference to hear what you have found out and what you have to share." So now, of course, a lot more diversity has occurred in IFS, but we still have our own work to do. And my big point is that we have a great tool in IFS that we can learn. And whether we learn the burdens that we've all taken on when we were painfully conditioned into racism or impacted by racism in our country, whether it came from our culture, it's extensive in all of us, whether they were cultural or structural, institutional, or internal, or interpersonal, or through painful conditioning. It's in all of us. And but we have this great tool to use. And I'll talk more about what I learned later. I'll let Ingrid see if she wants to add anything to what I've already said.
No, I think you captured a lot of how we kind of got there. And for me, it was just realizing once again that I was situated squarely in the middle of a very white community, which was the story of my entire life. And I take responsibility for that. It's not like, well, how did that happen? It was always what I knew, and I moved toward what I knew. And so, when it was able to be spoken about out loud in the IFS community, that was so important to me. I remember sitting in, John Schwartz did a workshop on it, and with his friend, whose name I don't know because I don't know him as well. Darren, yeah. And they were so sweet up there. They're both such great friends. But it was like, oh, maybe this can change. And I wanted that deeply for myself and for the community. So that's why it was so important to me. And I was so happy to sit down at the lunch table with Dorothea and a few others. And Dorothea knows her stuff. So it was, I knew it was a great opportunity right away.
So there's a part of me that wants to ask what it was like when you were doing your workshop and then Dick walked in.
Well, we all got a little nervous, I think. But I was glad he was there because I knew what we had to say was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I like to start with a quote from his article. And I did that at the workshop. I started out with that. And the quote that I used from his article about, what's the title of it? The inner bigot, working with the inner bigot. I forgot again.
To exercise or embrace the inner bigot.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And he says in there, and I think this is powerful, as we open our hearts to those who are viewed by our culture as worthless, powerless, and shameful, we open our hearts to those exiled parts of ourselves. And that's exactly how it was for me.
Yeah.
Should I go into what how I started? Yeah, that's
that'd be great.
Exactly how it was. The very first thing when I, decided, okay, this is what I'm going to be working on with Ingrid all the time. The first thing I had to do was work on shame, my own shame, and the shame of having any prejudice in me. And, as somebody who's done anti-racism work, we all know that for white people, when we carry guilt or shame or stuff like that, it gets in the way. And so I had effectively pushed all of the prejudice and the accompanying shame and guilt out of the way, and in all those years of doing that work. But if you can imagine the power of tracing the trailhead of shame to a little 6-year-old girl, and finding her underneath all of that and bringing resource to her, unburdening that shame was so powerful. It was more powerful than anything I'd ever done before. And it was beautifully uplifting and joyful to unburden her. And in her retrieval and integration, I now have this wonderfully passionate, connective 6-year-old light bearer with me all the time. That's the result, going through the pain of addressing her pain and witnessing her pain. The result is that, this little connective 6-year-old light bearer with me all the time. And Ingrid mentioned the polyvagel theory and Stephen Porges and Deb Dana. And I've known for many years, many years before I even knew Stephen Porges and Deb Dana, that we are as a species evolving toward more and more connection, human connection, that we are evolving in that way. So I think I remember teaching that 30 years ago. But, what Stephen Porges brought out in his scientific way, and then Deb Dana translating it for us who can't quite read him so well, that's relatively new. That's only like 13 years ago. So when you think about that, only 13 years ago, we realized we have a system in us of human connection in the body. So that's new information. And I could tell a long story, I won't tell it right now, about when I first found out about that and tried to read his article and talk to this doctor at Mayo. Long story, but she hoped I'd put it away because she couldn't understand it either. But she figured out, oh my God, I have to stop what they're doing here at Mayo. They're cutting the vagus nerve. And that was like 12 years ago. They were still cutting it because they had no idea what it really was. And so, but to stop people with painful ulcers, they were cutting it.
So I'm going to stop you for 1 second. So I have two things, and I don't want you to forget what you're saying, but I have two things. One is for people that don't know what you're talking about, like don't know about polyvagal theory. Do you want to say something about that? And do you want to say something about how that relates to our like parts that are our racist parts, and sort of how the polyvagal theory connects to the racism stuff?
Okay. I'll say something brief about that, but Ingrid who has studied it even more than I have. I'll let her say more about exactly, maybe briefly, exactly how that works. But all right, yeah. So what I would say is that in doing this work, working on your own racism, as you get to reclaim more and more human connection. That's what Dick was talking about, and also respect and self-respect, love for yourself and for others. That's the benefit of actually doing this work. And that's what you get to. So I'll let uh, Ingrid say a little bit about the polyvagal theory and how that all works. I love that, all of that work.
We didn't really work with that when we were doing the project, but it's really an important part of it now for me. For one thing, when you consider the polyvagal system, it's really divided into the sympathetic nervous system, which most of us are familiar with, that fight, flight, active, freeze, frozen, so on. The dorsal vagal system, which is primitive, and it's kind of our release valve when we can't handle the stress anymore. We can just go into that shutdown. And then this beautiful newest portion, which is the ventral vagal, which is heart and diaphragm up into the cranial nerves, and from where all the lovely oxytocin happens and the neurosystem of connection happens. And for some people, it's like, well, that place is just okay because of trauma and so on. And for others, it's beautiful and fantastic, and it can be toned, and it can be helped to be more prominent, more of an experience in the body as we use it. And so it's so exciting to think about that. And when you think about it in terms of the work that we did with parts and racism, I get really excited because I recognized, working with the parts, so many of my parts were, Dorothea talks about, having this interactivist for many, many years. I only had it as this like heart longing. And I think Dorothea probably remembers it, listening to my parts, like this heart longing, like what's wrong, what's missing, what's gone, and so separate from it. And under that, sympathetic nervous system, right? Which is when you're in the presence of a Black body, just a unexplicable agitation, fear. And for me, it wasn't ever an aggressive fear, like, oh, I want them, like they're bad or they're wrong. It was, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I don't know what to do. And I think about what a genetic sort of handed down burden that was on those parts of me forever. And still, I work on them every day, honestly. So, yeah, so I think that's how I connect the nervous system work with the parts work. And it is, it's huge, and it's so important. And it's very much like what Resma talks about in My Grandmother's Hands too. He doesn't bring the self in as much, but we would. But yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I don't know if you know Resma Menachen's work. He's from Minnesota too, by the way. He's a psychotherapist in Minneapolis, African American psychotherapist, and he calls the vagus nerve the soul nerve.
Yeah.
One of the ways I like to explain it simply to my clients is I say, okay, we have 3 forms of protection in the body. The most evolved is your human connection system. And as Ingrid said, it's your heart up and your voice and your facial expression and all that. Think about a baby. When a baby is born, the baby looks up at mom, makes eye contact, coos and makes sounds, and then mom feels warm in her heart, so she takes care of the baby. That's the baby's form of protection. But if you look at some of those videos where the mom, that were, Davidson and other people have done these experiments with babies, and mom goes away, then baby has to activate the second form of protection, which is the central vagus system, the fight flight. And so the baby cries, and they wave their arms and legs because all the energy has to go to the motor muscles. I have to fight or run. So shut down everything to the deeper organs, the digestive system and all that. And that's why you get bad ulcers, because you've got so much adrenaline going on. But anyway, so the baby does that. And then mom comes. Okay, then mom picks up the baby because she's using that system. And then she calms down. But if mom doesn't come and baby really has to activate and really gets agitated, and this was in all of the child rearing books in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even in the 80s and 90s. If the baby's crying and you want them to go to sleep, just put them in the other room. They'll cry, but they'll go to sleep. Well, yes, they will, but they're turning on their last resort form of protection, which Ingrid talked about, the shutdown. You know, the shut everything down. I'm not being taken care of. I've got to preserve my life. So shut everything down in my body and go to sleep, go out. And then, you know, we have parts that learn that really young and then they take it to a big extreme, like the extreme dissociative part, which is, you know, really the shutdown and everything in between, all the ways we numb out or space out or whatever. So that's how I like to explain the polyvagal system, the ventral vagal, the central vagal, and the dorsal vagal. I found it really remarkable as I was doing my own personal work around it with Ingrid and a couple others. I found it remarkable that a 10-year-old exile could clearly see and sense the whole class structure that she was living in and sense its intersection with racism, although she didn't have the words for it. But this child of poor immigrants really measured herself and her family against what she saw around her and who was supposed to fit where on this social and economic ladder. And I thought that was really amazing that she was judging herself and her family because they didn't fit in. And I could see the intersection of the racism there. And the what I want to say about it, I think, is to see the value of doing the work is the confusions, the burdens of limits on her awareness, limits to her consciousness, limits to free movement. It felt like shackles to her. And the interesting thing to me is that you might remember this, Ingrid, that it actually produced physical pain in her body. And I had had that physical pain my whole life, but I didn't really understand all it was about. And this isn't the only thing it was about, but this was a big piece of it. It was like shackles in my legs holding me back. You know, that I somehow wasn't good enough to step forward. I didn't measure up. And that physical pain was really big. And the confusion and the tension and the pain about not measuring up in this classist, racist society, yet even so young, having a strong internal awareness of something larger. There was something larger and bigger that was being limited. And what comes in that unburdening, you know, a strong sense of being okay how she is, of deep connectivity to others, of free movement. That was such a blessing. Oh, to, you know, to feel like my body could let go of some of that pain and some of that clutching. Um, sense of value, of no limits, of abundance easily available to all. And all of this deeply healing personally, as well as empowering my activist parts. So, you know, I got a lot from that experiment, healing shame, healing racist, prejudiced parts. And not that I'm done, I still have a lot more, as we all do. And but getting to self-respect and respect for others and deep connections and the empowerment of that. So that's what I found by doing the work. So I think we have a great tool.
Wow. Ingrid, what did you find doing this work together?
Well, you know, we would start with kind of anything that, like you do IFS, anything that comes up, right, around what's coming up for you around racism, bigotry, you know, stereotypes. What comes up? What are you feeling? And so, as often happens, it sends you down into your history, right? So for me, I was raised in a tiny town in northern Pennsylvania, and there were only about 2,500 people. And of those 2,500, I recall one Black child who was Black, one Black human. I think that was the only one there, only person of color at all. I mean, there were, it's funny, I probably grew up with quite a few people who were indigenous in some way to that area. Allegheny, there were Allegheny tribes and so on in that area. But really, I mean, the town was named after the tribes, as was the river we were on and the mountains we were in. But I don't remember learning anything about them.
Wow.
Yeah, so I realized, I mean, probably more now I realize than when we were doing the project, how unbelievably whitewashed my childhood was. And I have parts of me that are happy to see that, because it explains when we would go in doing the IFS process, my young parts were so confused all the time. It was really like being gaslit, really. Like, so, not that anybody was intentionally gaslighting me. It was the air you were swimming in kind of thing. And I couldn't figure out, we would see every summer, I don't know how many kids come up from New York City, predominantly Black children. There might have been some that weren't, but predominantly Black children from the city, through Fresh Air program, it was called. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but so that was really my only contact with kids of color. And I was fascinated by, these beautiful people in my presence, but I had no idea how to meet them, how to talk to them, what to do, how to be. They weren't staying in my house. They were staying, I don't know why. We just didn't happen to have one. We weren't part of that, whatever organization was doing it. I don't even know how it happened. But so even that is like, it's all confusing. Like, how are they here? And why are they here? And where are their parents? And why do they leave? And, why do they talk differently? And, I kind of knew I wasn't a foolish child, but I also didn't get an opportunity to just sit and chit chat with them. And they were probably nervous wrecks coming to suddenly out of New York to podunk Nothingville. And, everybody is white. And, I just can't even imagine how weird it would have been for them.
Yeah.
But that just left me with this sensation of like, these humans are not for you. They're not for you. They're not. And it always maybe felt like then it became a belief system in a way, like they couldn't like you. They wouldn't like you. They don't want to stay. Their parents don't accompany them. I just remember when we were meeting with this part of me, it was like, I was shocked at how she just had no idea what to make of it. And I don't think ever really talked about it with anybody, or would have even had the words to put that into, because it was just a thing that happened like everything else. Right.
Yeah.
And so the grace of it for me was working with these parts and getting this free sense of like, I can be whoever I am. That is fine. And I don't have to make them own any of my insecurities from these parts of me. In other words, they never did. These kids that came, they didn't see, they had nothing to do with what I was thinking or feeling about them. Nothing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was all this internal lack of guidance, no conversation, secretive, really. I don't even know what people would have said if I had asked any questions, because honestly, the grown-ups around me weren't very educated either. They were educated, they were bright people. My parents are both educators, but they weren't educated about people from many different cultures at all. So I just, learned to kind of, this is not for you. This is not for me. And yet the heart's longing was, I want to be with these people. I want to know these people. I'm starved. Everybody kind of looks alike and everybody kind of thinks, something the same, and it's too small.
Dorothea, you were shaking your head yes when Ingrid, you were talking about confusion. And so I want to talk about that because what I'm feeling as you guys are talking, of course, I'm thinking of my own memories and my own childhood and thinking of things that aren't said. And so I think that's part of what you're saying is there's this thing happening and no one's talking about it. And sort of my body is feeling this confusion.
I just think it's really interesting how children have some sense of something else. And our exiles they actually know something else, and they get confused by what they see in the world when it's not working the way they think it's supposed to be. And they kind of know that. That's what I found they have some sense of something else. And so I think that confusion is normal and great to help them with, to intervene there. And I think it's also pretty amazing, and Ingrid, shared about this, and so did I, what the child totally internalized without anybody telling them anything. They internalize it. It's just so in the culture, and it's all internalized without. And there's nobody there to explain to them what's really going on.
Yeah.
And it's not in the history books, as Ingrid was saying. There's no history. There was no history of the indigenous people. And when I read Resme Menaken's book now, sometimes, and I hear what Europeans actually went through in Europe, and the cruelty that we have passed down to us as our legacy burdens. We have tremendous physical cruelty toward each other, toward white people toward white people, and then we passed it on to African Americans here. And when I read Caste, I just cried when she laid out exactly what went on in the South to Black people, the Black bodies. I just cried. So it's not something we're taught, but somehow children pick it up. They just, and it confuses them.
That's part of the sort of goal of, white supremacy, if you will, to leave us things unseen, to leave things confusing. And I think it's more and more what I appreciate about IFS in this is you can name and know anything, right? And if you can't, that's when we are in trouble. That's when it's just, you come up with reasons for why you feel insecure that don't have anything to do with the people that you're creating the reasons about. And so I feel like, the ability to become and to be anti-racist and to be more of an activist in this world, which I think this time is calling us to do more than it has in my lifetime, maybe, or since my awareness, maybe not my lifetime. This being able to go in and do this work enables you to be present, to learn what you need to learn, to hear what you need to hear, and to accept what you need to accept in order to go forward and to be effective. And if you can't do that, you can't. You're just part of the problem more and more and more. Even if you have a good heart. I know when I started this, my heart was in the right place and has been, I believe, all my life. I don't have the shame of like, oh, I hated that person, or, oh, I wanted them dead, or, oh, I don't have that. And I think many, many, many people who are very racist because of our bones, right? Also don't want harm for anyone. They also wouldn't see themselves as perpetrators, right? That's that complicity, right? But if we can't go in and be with these parts of us and help unburden them, we really can't do the work. And this is the way to do it,
You're talking about all parts are welcome.
Yes, that's right.
The other thing I would say, which Ingrid referenced, is it was put in place. Racism was created and put into place. It's a fabrication. It's not real.
Right.
And Resme Menachem.
Well, racism is real, but race is not real.
Right. And Resme Menachem talks about it was really put into place to shore up capitalism. And I think that's what was really clear to me in my sessions, that, you know, like in the South, when African Americans were brought here, if poor white people and African Americans were together, then that would have been a disaster for the landowners, because they would have all rebelled. So if we give this group a little more over here, so that this group, they'll feel better than this group, then they'll ally with us and we keep capitalism in place. So, you know, he points out that purpose of racism being to keep the colonialist capitalist structure in place. And that was so clear to me growing up, that, you know, the intersection of, as I said, of capitalism and racism.
And that happens so much now in these really creepy, subtle ways. Like, you move into a town, where are you going to move if you have school-age children? You're going to move to this city where you know the education is lesser. They get less. They just do. And so here you are with your 3 little kids. You're going to move them in there. You're going to take them where you can live in a more diverse community. You're going to do that. You're going to fight for that school. You won't be done before they're out of school. You're going to try it. What are you going to do? And it's just all meant to keep us separated. It's all meant to do that.
And as we said, when we do this work, which we have this powerful model to do, we get connected. That's where it goes.
Oh, I just got this huge wave of like sadness. Like,
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that comes up with this, is the ability to deeply grieve for all of those stages of one's life, that those parts had to be subjected to that and believe that, and then to find the joy that's beyond it too.
And also to grieve now at what
Yeah.
in happening to people now, and pay attention to it and see, and actually see it and grieve it, and say no.
This is not from our project, but bounces off of that. I think it was Resma that had an Instagram post not too long ago, and it was of a lynching. It's just an abominable photo
in Duluth, Minnesota.
Oh God. And he said, he just said, what do you notice in this picture? And I realized my whole life, my eyes go right to the victim and stare at the victim and ache for the victim. But I also realized that there is intention in a way. There is protection in doing that, oddly, because I'm not looking at the bodies that look like mine, that are standing with their gloating and their satisfaction and their potentially their shame. I don't even see them. Your eyes don't even pick them up. And I think, again, that's another great trailhead for parts. You can go in and go, what parts keep me from seeing? What parts keep me from hearing when BIPOC are talking about their experience? What is preventing that, right?
That photo of that lynching was a postcard.
I know. Yeah, most of them were now, because that's, yeah. Oh yeah, that was a celebration type thing. Like, can you even?
And, it's good that we're like Tammy, I see you saying with your body, you're saying no. We need to say no to that.
Yeah.
And to face it and look at it and feel the pain of it, and know that that's. And Resma talks about how in Europe, before white people came here, they were often forced to watch hangings,
Mm-hmm.
and forced to watch being drawn and quartered. so that people would obey laws. They'd make them go watch these horrible punishments. Imagine watching somebody be drawn and quartered, their arms and legs pulled apart by horses.
Ingrid and I, just for the listeners to know, Ingrid and I are cringing. Ingrid's like shaking her head, no, and I'm like moving my body.
I just muted Dorothea, and I'm not even allowed.
No, I'm gonna make a joke. I'm gonna do something.
Yeah, you got to discharge some of that. It's hard. Yeah.
That's a legacy burden.
Yeah.
That we carry, and that went on till the 1850s.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? I'll tell you this piece of history that most people don't know. In Minnesota, we had the largest execution of indigenous people, the largest hanging in the history of the U.S., with 38 men were hung the day after Christmas. And 4,000 people, white people, showed up to watch it on the day after Christmas. Now, what would draw somebody? Those are big parts. Those are big legacy burden parts.
And those
on to watch a hanging of 38 men.
Yeah. Those people are still showing up today.
And that's history we were never taught.
Right.
Did you ever hear about that?
No.
You didn't live in Minnesota?
Even if I had been, I suggest I probably wouldn't have, right?
The good news about that is that there's an honoring now every year. I don't know what will happen this year, but usually around, on the day after Christmas, but these Native American people, including, I have an adopted Dakota daughter, adopted in the Dakota tradition, where it's not a formal adoption, but she's a total member of our family. She's in her 30s now and has children, and my children think of her as their sister. She thinks of we're her other family. She has two families. But anyway, she's been involved for a long time in honoring those 38, the Dakota 38, and they do it by a ride. They ride horseback from South Dakota across in December, across southern Minnesota. And towns along the way are invited to put them up for resting and feeding and stuff like that. And they do that. And, like these churches or these other organizations have a big crowd of them and feed them and welcome them. And now they include a lot of walkers to honor the water. It's called a water walk. And also to honor, because in Minnesota, the indigenous people were forced out, forced removal. So they were sent to reservations in South Dakota in the middle of nowhere where you can't make a living. But anyway, there's no hunting. There was no way they could eat it. That's another whole story. But very poor reservations. And it's still against the law. The law hasn't been taken off the book that Dakota and Lakota people are not allowed to live in Minnesota. And it's not enforced, obviously, at all. But they walk back in because they had to walk out.
Wow.
And then they gather in this little town in southern Minnesota where the hanging happened. It's called Mankato. And they honor the Dakota 38. But last year, my adopted daughter, Gracie, brought in the fact that 200 women and children had died in the concentration camp, the Fort Snelling concentration camp, before the 38 were hung. They wanted to hang 200, but Lincoln wouldn't sign for that many. And they were trying to become a state. And so he wanted to have Minnesota be part of the Union. And the Minnesota governor said, well, the people won't be happy if you don't do this. So he said, I'll only sign to execute any who have been proven to have murdered or raped, and only 2 could be proven. And but he said we can't have just 2. So he ended up signing for 38. And the native people in Minnesota don't like Abraham Lincoln because of that. So Gracie brought in the fact that we also need to honor the 200 women and children who died in the concentration camp. So that happens the day after Christmas. I don't know what they'll do this year. Last year, the governor showed up.
Wow.
At the big, there's a big ceremony and lots of people come. And the governor showed up last year and he apologized.
I guess my one question is, what do we do about our racist parts, right? Our parts that are like, I'm embarrassed about my racist part, but I would rather not talk about it, think about it. Like, I like my little white existence, and
So
I'm making a face like, ooh, this is uncomfortable to say.
That's great.
I talk about that. So when you're in session, all parts are welcome, you know, and you have that agreement with the person who's your therapist that you're trading with. So we encourage people to trade, and we give out trailheads. We have a list of trailheads that you can use, and if you know, I gave you those. What was it? 32 ways of, I forget how many ways of addressing your racism.
So I'm just going to say it so people can look it up or Google it. It's called White Privilege: Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh.
That's really cool to use, but that's not the one I was talking about. Let me find it. The concrete work of eliminating your racism.
Gotcha. And then, okay.
A lot of ways of trailheads that you can use.
Yeah. And so if people want that, like, can they email you to get are you open to give that out?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
We can give out all our handouts. You know, we have video handouts and that are powerful. Remember at the conference, we played that film. We really talked about, how's this going to go over? We played that powerful video. What was the name of it?
That's the one with
I have a list. I have the list here.
It's like it's to the tune of Raindrops on Roses, but it's white. It's Black Rage by
Rage. Yeah.
Is it the Lauryn Hill one?
Lauryn Hill.
Lauryn Hill one. Yeah.
Every time I try to get her name, I only can come up with Anita Hill, which I know is a totally different human being. So yeah.
So that one, if you go to YouTube, Lauryn Hill, Black Rage, Black Lives Matter edition. So go to YouTube and check out that video. Yeah. And then if you want this is 32 trailheads. Then you can email Dorothea and ask her for that handout, and she will email that handout to you.
And there are 52 ways of claiming your white privilege.
Yeah. So I highlighted this I read this line that said, white privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. And I thought that was fantastic. And I think when I was reading through these 50 like daily effects of white privilege, I'm like, yep. Like, it's things I don't even think about.
No,
that are just part of my daily life. It's like
we're just swimming in it. We don't until you see it, you don't see it. And then when you start seeing it, you see it everywhere. Yeah. And that's often where the parts really step up: the shame, the rage, the embarrassment, One
of the ways that I use that helps that is in a group. If I have a group, I have them playfully claim those. Like, can you claim one in a playful voice? How many could you claim in a playful voice? So instead of avoiding them, they claim them playfully.
I love that idea. That is such a good idea.
They laugh about having it instead of going into shame about having it.
Yeah, I love that.
But noticing the shame there's a trailhead right there, that shame right there. Yeah,
that's great.
I remember being very surprised when we were working together, Dorothea, because I was well aware that you were really astute on the subject and had studied, and like you do. And yet, and I don't mean this I mean this to say
I know
this.
exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, every time it would be, I need to check in with you, Ingrid, because this feels so shameful for me to name this. And I was always like, not surprised that it was there, because I think it's just naturally there for all of us, but that that you were still fearful about it with me, because it's like, no, I get it.
Yes.
This is there. And so if anybody's working with someone and they're like, what do I do with that? Name your shame, because
And follow its trail.
yeah, because it's okay. Underneath there, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're going to get to the exile that needs you. And again, it won't be about what you think it's about.
So that makes me think of, when you're talking about that, here's what I thought you were going to say. I had a lot of trouble claiming any white privilege because I didn't grow up with privilege. Okay.
Right.
And a lot of people go there and they want to say, but I'm allied because I was. And when I first learned anything about racism, I was in my early 20s, and a group of African American folks from Boston came down to where I was teaching school on Martha's Vineyard, and we had a weekend, and I listened and listened, and it was painful, and I wanted to say, but I didn't. I kept quiet, but I wanted to, and at the end I said, when we had to give our kind of last things, I said, in my early 20s, I said, I want you to take what you're supposed to have, but I have this. And I didn't call it a part, but I understand it was a part in me that wanted to say, take it easy. And because that's one of the things, and I think this is very common for white people, is this feeling that we're going to lose something. And when I've worked on my racism, often that's where it goes. Like, I'm going to lose something that was so hard to gain in the first place. And I think that says a lot about where people are in this country right now. And that fear is being stoked. You're going to lose something if Black people have their full rights. That's a big piece of white. That's that thing about keeping capitalism in place. You will lose your privilege.
That's right.
And so it took me forever to be able to claim privilege. And I live on this gorgeous farm. I have a beautiful house. I don't suffer financially. My children all were able to go to college, and we could pay for most of it. but I still had trouble claiming that privilege, and till I had to keep doing the work in order to get there. So I don't think that's very unusual for people to be in that place. And so to know that that's perfectly normal, but keep going, keep playfully claiming those privileges that you have.
I feel really touched when you talked about using that as a trailhead and then going to the exile, and because you don't know what it's going to be. We just like another part, like if I have a trailhead about something, I often don't realize what that protector is protecting.
Yeah.
And so why would it be any different?
Yeah.
That's the good news. It isn't different.
Yes.
It isn't different.
But it's
powerful. And I was going to say, and you may find that there is more once you get down to your own personal exiles. I think there's a whole other level too of legacy burden that, again, we didn't really go into as much because we were really busy doing the personal work. And I think you have to start there because you can't hear the legacy stuff first. Yeah. I don't believe you can. But after that, to start looking at the legacy burdens, because that also clarifies so much of the whitewashing and the gaslighting we've been given. For example, I would always say, my relatives I'm third generation Swedish. What did Swedes ever do? Haha, but no Vikings ever hurt anyone.
I remember that session, Ingrid.
Oh yeah, I was totally
the Vikings.
I was so convinced about Swedish, peaceful, kind of socialist, democratic, whatever, and
you remember telling me what the Vikings actually did?
Yeah, I know.
Wait, I want to know, what did the Vikings actually do?
What did I tell you?
Oh, excuse me, Ingrid. said that. That was referring to your session.
Oh, no.
Sorry. Yeah.
No. I don't know what I said, so you have to remind me what I said then.
The Vikings were
The rapers and the pillagers.
cruel.
The rapers and pillagers, I think.
And those were Jesus. And they thought it was their divine guidance telling them to do that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you got to do scary stuff, I guess you got to have some sort of crazy resource, which is not to excuse them. But I'm just saying, like I was really raised with that. Like I wasn't part of the American, my family wasn't part of that culture. I didn't come from that, slave owners in the South, blah, blah. Well, baloney. If you're in this world culture, you're a part of this.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about doing the work using IFS, starting from the inside out, while there's all those fears that have been taught to you your whole life and are still right in your face about you're going to lose this and you better be careful and you're going to lose that, you have nothing to lose, honestly.
That's the legacy burden.
That's right. I mean, you might have to pay some money. You might have to pay some reparations. You might have to you might have to give up something, but that's nothing compared to the soul that we've lost. In my opinion, like that's nothing. It's just nothing. It's about all of your people and reclaiming the earth, because then it eventually all goes back to the earth, to climate, to how we respect species and beings on this earth. It is all one thing.
Yeah.
And so that's why I love the work. I love IFS because you start with the tiniest little drip inside of your exile, and it enables you to come up and out and see the whole world.
Okay, so here's a trailhead that's not a tiny bit. If you were to say, I benefited from genocide.
Yeah.
And feel that and that's hard. That's a big trailhead.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to encourage the city councilors in my town to be able to admit, that we benefited from genocide. And the good news was that 3 of the women, of the 4 women that are on the city council, said that at the meeting. They said, after I had sent them all letters, with all this stuff, and they said, we have to claim that we've benefited from genocide.
Yeah. So gross.
And they started to cry at the city council meeting.
It's an unburdening.
So
it's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, the only other thing I was thinking about that is you talked about kind of the common areas. And one of the ones I really struggled with when I was working with this marvelous group of women, IFS women here, was these women, Dorothea and Joya and Tyler, kept throwing out the word black all the time. Black and white, black. Remember this, Dorothea? Black and white, black and white, black people, white people, black people. And I am quintessentially raised in the era that you're hearing often cited from people now. I don't see color, right? Yeah. I don't want to see color. People are myriad shades. I am not white. I am sort of ecru or ivory or, and I was really raised in that. That was big and still had roots. And so it took a lot for me just to be able, you can probably even hear it in the podcast today. Like, it's hard. I stumble over, what do I say? How do I say this? And yet it's so essential. Not that we understand race is this created thing, although I was taught it in my science book, absolutely, positively, Mongoloid, Caucasoid, Negroid. Remember that? Were you taught that? Oh, we had photos.
I remember.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so to me, that was just science, right? Which it's not. It's just a big fat lie. Mm-hmm. But the idea then that, let's do it this way. Let's not see the color that we're,
keep it in
clearly.
Keep
it invisible.
Yeah. Part of the
so if you experience that, name it, because you can work with that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to, I can just speak for, I think it's, well, okay, let me say this. I find there's a part of me gets angry and wants to argue with people who say that.
Say what?
Say, I don't see color.
Yeah, well, yeah, you should. Say. You could speak for that anger.
Maybe, yeah, because it doesn't go anywhere, right? Because then, yeah, but
Yeah, it is fair to get under that and to speak for it, because, and that's more and more what we're being called to do. Yeah.
Or to say, a Black person doesn't deserve to be invisible. And they
right,
get to claim their Blackness.
Yeah.
right,
One of the, it is interesting how people of global majority, that's the term I've been taught to use, because that's more truthful. But, a lot of Black people are discussing, what do they want to be called? Remember when we were supposed to not say Black,
Right.
don't call them Black, call them African Americans. And now
Right.
they're saying, don't call us African American. We're Black bodies. And so they're claiming the Blackness. But also some people say, use the more accurate term of people of global majority. And that makes white people uncomfortable too. Because like, what? They're the majority? I remember telling a college professor's husband something about that about 20 years ago. And he got so nervous. I could see his nervousness, like, wait a minute, white people, and he didn't say it, but I know what he was thinking, that white people aren't going to be the majority, And in the U.S., what they used
That's
to say
not
by
good.
2020, and now they're saying like by 2040, white people will be in the minority.
Yeah.
So we can't use the word minorities. So even though a lot of people still do. So shall I read the quote from Dick?
yeah. Let's read the quote by Dick.
Okay. So I love this quote from Dick. It says, "We can't bring light into the darkness in our country or our family if we haven't shown it on the dark places in ourselves. The natural compassion and courage contained in ourselves will find ways to resist injustice and will fight for the oppressed. The self knows one is an interconnected member of the larger community of humankind, a meta perspective that permits people to think ecologically about whatever system they're embedded in. With that sense of interconnectedness comes the understanding that when someone suffers, we all suffer. Then we don't need incentives or prods from outside. We act from the inner knowledge that we're not separate." I treasure that quote. I treasure doing my own hard work of looking at my own racism, even though sometimes I'd rather not. But I know that we do have, this powerful tool that helps us act from that human connection system that we're not separate.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Both of you, thank you so much. This was amazing and just so good to be with you. And I can't thank you enough.
Thanks for listening to us.
I could listen to you all go on and on and on. You guys tell good stories.
So good to be with you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.
Today's episode was sponsored by Brighter Vision. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happen way too often. A nice looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off exclusively for listeners of the One Inside podcast. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/inside. Again, that's brightervision.com/inside.